Good morning. I want to welcome you to the second legislative coffee for this legislative session. I want to begin by telling you that I only have one microphone, and so I think I'm going to be the roving microphone person today too, so be kind. If you are going to ask, I only ask that you ask one question at a time. Please hold all your applause. I know you're really itching to applaud today for any additional questions. You can ask any question you want, however, statements are not allowed, so please get to your question. And then take a moment and turn your cell phone either off or to silent so that individuals who may be tuning in either on the Government Access Channel, on YouTube, or any other venue that they may be watching this on can do that without listening to your wonderful ringer. We want to thank the sponsors today of the Legislative Coffee. First and foremost, of course, the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce and the Legislative Action Committee. Farm Bureau, Franklin County Farm Bureau Association, American Legion Post number 60. Refreshments today were brought by ECAN, so thank you, ECAN, for bringing us refreshments. The City of Ottawa for providing the facility, opening up their doors this morning, providing coffee. And thank you to Matt and Paul for videotaping this particular event and putting this out for all of our citizens to see. So thank you. We are going to begin our session today, or our coffee today, with just a quick question that I'll have our members start with and reply to. Introduce yourself, of course, if you don't know who these people are. But with the 2018 legislative session, which has reached turnaround this week, tell me what your thoughts are about the legislative session.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kevin Jones. I represent the 5th District. For those who don't know, 5th District it goes from Wellsville, where I live, and it basically goes all the way down below Colony. Goes along and goes right below Ottawa. So right now we're outside my current district, and then it goes over and gets Osawatomie and also gets Anderson County goes up and gets a little piece of Miami and a little piece of Lynn County. So that's the current district that I represent, and this is my 6th year in the House. So that said, I'm also on, just to give you an idea of maybe kind of lead you in the questions or whatever, but I'm on Higher Education Budget Committee, I'm on K through 12 Budget Committee, and lastly, I'm on Appropriations Committee. And that is the least amount of committees that I've ever had, but given always the state of what the legislature does, with kind of holding the purse strings of our Kansas legislature, or of the state, the Appropriations Committee tends to be a pretty heated and busy committee. So that said, we're at turnaround. We just worked 50 to 60 bills, lots of bills, and that essentially that means that all the bills that we work in the House goes over to the Senate, and all the Senate bills come over to the House, and we work them just like the Senate did, and they work ours just like we did, and ultimately, after everybody comes to a consensus in between, it goes to the governor to be signed. So in the process, some bills die and some bills don't, and that's part of the process. It can be tedious and hard work, and I was just telling Representative Finch how good his committee has done. We worked, and he'll tell you, we worked a lot of judiciary bills came out of his committee, and his committee, a lot of times you pass those on to other representatives, and then they work those and everything. So there's a lot of people working hard right now to get bills out, and I'll stop with this, but always in the back of your mind, ultimately what we have to do is push out a budget that's going to be efficient and effective and do the work of the people. And so yesterday we had a hearing on in K through 12 budget. It was a joint hearing. The rest of the legislature was off if they wanted to be off, but many of them came and listened in, and we were getting an update on a cost, basically estimating the costs associated with achievement expectations for Kansas public education students. And Dr. Lori Taylor came in and she spoke to that. And so that's going to help a lot, hopefully, with coming up with the answers for our judges. So with that, I'll...
Well, good morning, everybody. It's nice to see you out. The weather is miserable, and nice to see everybody out on this day. It's a good day to be inside. I want to welcome most, I think, of Ms. Campbell's students. I think we could probably have class here today with as many of you as are here. I'm told there might be extra credit offered. Is that the reason you're all here? You're just that interested in the workings of state government?
We're going 3 hours because of it.
Yeah. I think we do. Isn't that the rule? You got to get 3 hours outside the classroom to get some extra credit inside. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of those issues important to these young people, I hope. As Representative Jones said, we just came through turnaround. All of the bills in the House, with some exceptions, have to be out, and vice versa on the Senate. We had 55 bills on our calendar this week. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're on the floor all day debating bills, acting as a giant committee of the whole. All 125 of us weighing in on bills, and the Senate side, 40 of them weighing in on bills. And as Representative Jones said, Judiciary has been a busy committee. Of those 50, actually I think 52 bills that got worked, 11 of those came out of the Judiciary Committee. And some of those products were ones that I'm very proud of. We worked on body cam issues related to law enforcement. We forged a compromise between some parties that had some disagreements and got that done. We worked on civil asset forfeiture, which has been a big issue in the state about when property can be seized and ultimately forfeited back to the state. And we had a kind of consensus product that came out of that we worked on. We worked on some domestic violence protections. For instance, in situations where there's domestic violence and maybe a joint cell phone contract, we had a bill that we worked on with AT&T and Verizon to allow a victim of domestic violence to be able to split that contract and eliminate one more way that abusers actually try to control their victims and keep them from being able to get free from their abuse. So we did a lot of that. We worked on a bill to stiffen penalties for mistreatment of dependent adults by guardians and conservators and others who would take advantage of vulnerable older people. And so we've seen a lot of good progress on things, I think, coming out of the Judiciary Committee this year. As Representative Jones said, the biggest issue is yet to come. That's the school funding study, and that will be done on March 15th. So this was kind of the prelude, if you will, and getting a bunch of things done now and trying to get them across the dome and in anticipation of what will probably be a pretty intense debate after March 15th on education funding. And what we're told is there will be suggestions to the formula as well. And so I think those will probably actually be more contentious than the dollars that are recommended by this study. There are people who have little pieces of that formula that they're wedded to, and they don't want to give them up easily. So that will be an interesting debate when we come back in March. But we'll go back up next Wednesday and start working on the Senate bills in our chamber. Senator Tyson and her friends will get to work on the House bills that we've sent over. And I'm told they sent us a lot fewer bills to work on. So we'll see what we've got to work with. Glad you're all here this morning. Good to see you all.
Well, good morning, everybody. My apologies for being a little late. This morning took a little bit of a turn that I wasn't expecting. We had a baby calf that we had to deal with. We did save the calf, so we're excited about that. It's in the heater right now, but it did set me a little bit behind on schedule. You would think with the alarm going off at 5 a.m. that 10 a.m. would be easy to make, but it's been an interesting session. Needless to say, the Senate did pass fewer bills this week at turnaround than the House did. We had a considerable amount of debate on a few bills. I'm anxious to see what the House does with them. Some of them were good bills, as always. Some of them need a lot of work. We had one bill that was interesting on expensing. I carried the bill on the floor as the tax chairman, but this one I actually supported, which was unusual last year. In 2012, what happened, well, in 2011, we passed legislation that would allow businesses to deduct some of their expenses. And in 2012, that was repealed. What happened, though, is corporations and privileged taxing entities were allowed to still consider taking this expense. Well, when we put the tax bill into place last year, 2017, when that passed, that retroactive tax increase, it did not include the expensing portion for small businesses. So what this bill would do, Senate Bill 331, is to clean that up and put them on the same playing field as corporations and private taxing entities. The bill ended up passing considerably. There was a motion to send it back to committee, that's what forced most of the debate. And the person that made the motion that argued against the bill voted for it in the end. So it tells you that it's a decent bill and it needs to be taken care of. I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you. I'm going to dive right into some recent events that have happened here in the United States. After the tragic events in Florida on Valentine's Day, President Trump indicated on Thursday that he is in support of giving teachers bonus pay if they agree to carry a gun while teaching at a school. Governor Collier further indicated that it, quote unquote, may be a good solution to give bonuses to teachers who carry guns. Please respond. You can choose whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'd be glad to. I hadn't heard Governor Collier's comments. What I have heard is a funding mechanism possibly for teachers who are interested in taking courses. Instead of a bonus, it would be that the classes would be paid for. I know that's being bantered around a little bit, but this is a tough situation. It was a tragic situation. This audience knows that mental health is a big issue for me. It has been for a while. I know that every time one of these tragedies comes up that we talk about it, but we need to give it the attention that it deserves and not just talk about it. We need action.
Representative Jones?
The actual discussion is coming at a tragic, because of a tragic situation, and you always wish that you can go back and change the situation, and so I go back and I say, what could we have done to prevent this? And really, this goes back to our Second Amendment. It goes back to the Constitution, to our God-given right to protect ourselves. And it means a whole lot to me, and I've spoken from the floor when it comes to our Second Amendment rights, to our gun rights, to protect ourselves. And that I was up in Lawrence, and I had this thought a lot, but I was up in Lawrence, and we were, just skirting across the parking lot at McDonald's, which we never go to McDonald's, but we went to McDonald's and we were crossing the parking lot, and I have all these little kids, trailing behind me. We have 7 kids and one on the way. And as they were cutting across the parking lot, the drive-through, they're going through the drive-through and they're coming around, and it's just so hectic, and it's a corner and you can't see, and so I think about the protection of my children all of the time. And so I realize there's, it makes it difficult when it comes to for myself protecting all these kids and all of that stuff, but it is one of those things that for myself it should, without a doubt, I feel this heavy responsibility to protect them, not just myself, but to protect my children too. And so whatever we can actually do when it comes to our children and their safety. I mean, our schools are a lot more than 7 kids, and each of our teachers, even in the smallest classrooms, 7 is probably a pretty small number. So you're talking about a whole lot of children. So I think that maybe the president has said a few things just very quickly without thinking it all through. But at the same time, without a doubt, whatever we have to do to make sure that our children are protected, I would be for it.
Representative Finch.
I too had not heard the statement that the now governor had made about this. I can tell you that I think our teachers have enough to do in the classroom without having to worry about being pressed into duty as security guards, and that the idea, if we're going to pay teachers bonuses for anything, it should be for performance in the classroom and for results that our children display, and it should not be for serving as de facto security guards for the school. We had an incident here in Ottawa some months ago, I got the call from my daughter, who was locked down in the school library, while the police responded swiftly and professionally here to try to secure the situation and worked with the school district officials to make that happen. It is hard to explain to anyone who hasn't had that phone call and who hasn't had to talk to their child in that situation. We are in the midst of a series of national tragedies around school shootings in this country. And I believe that it is an adaptive problem, meaning that it doesn't just have one simple solution. There's not a soundbite that's going to solve all of this. It's going to take a lot of action on a lot of different fronts. But I don't believe that arming teachers and having them act as security guards is going to be the cure-all for this problem, nor do I believe that the state should spend its education dollars on bonuses for this sort of thing. So I would disagree with the president and the governor on this front.
Okay, thank you. We're going to switch just a little bit, and then I'm going to ask the audience for their questions. Could you please explain the benefit of the imposed tax lid on cities and counties when the largest portion of property tax goes to benefit the state education fund, and the state is the primary beneficiary of all property value increases? Senator Tyson?
Well, gladly. This 20 mil does come to the state for property tax. Property tax is interesting. We've been doing a deep dive in the State Senate Tax Committee on it. And a majority of your property tax does go to support your school. But that money, it goes to the state, and then it comes back to the local school, almost all of it. There's a small percentage, I think it's 1 point, I'm not sure what the exact number is anymore, but it's a very small percentage that stays with the state. The rest of it comes back to the local school district. We've been looking at this. We had PVD, we had BODA, we had the county appraisers, and constituents come in and testify. And the 28th we'll have a few more constituents, the big box stores, come in and testify on property tax. All of those groups made the statement that our property tax are high in Kansas. Every single group agreed that we have high property tax in Kansas. So we need to look at the process, and that's what we're doing in the Senate Tax Committee. We're taking a deep dive into what possible solutions are. And we'll hopefully have something come up in the next few weeks that we can introduce a bill and start working on legislation. Almost, like I said, that small portion goes to state for property tax. The rest of it is local. It's local government, it's local, your county governments, your city governments, your fire departments, your grave cemeteries. There's over 3,000 taxing entities in the state of Kansas, and a majority of it for property tax is not the state level. So, but it is a state concern, and one of the items that I've talked about for years, and it made it extremely obvious when we brought these different groups in to testify, you'll go and you'll have your property valuation, you'll see a change there, and then you'll get your property tax bill, and you'll go to protest it. Well, you'll be told that, you know, we didn't do this, another group did it, Topeka did it. Well, when they say Topeka, did they mean the legislature or did they mean PVD? And then you go to PVD and PVD says, well, we didn't do this, your county did it. And so it just keeps, it's this vicious cycle. It's very hard for a constituent to actually land on where the change was and what the change resulted in. One of the things we've seen that's interesting to me is we've had category changes. That's in our Constitution, the category changes for property tax. And we've had land, soil types changed. We've had one senator, I guess this is what really kicked off the conversation this year. He had agriculture land, and they reclassified it. The classification was changed to urban. He didn't change anything. They're still farming the land, but it just got changed. But that county has had trouble with county appraisers. If you look, there's a news story out that was last year they had some land valuation go up over 2,000%. It was an egregious situation, and so it's forced the conversation a little bit quicker probably than we would have, but we do need to have this conversation, and we do need to figure out what's going on with the property tax process.
Representative Jones?
Do you mind restating the question?
Sure. Explain the benefit of the imposed tax limit when the largest portion of property tax goes to benefit the state education fund and the state is the primary beneficiary of all property value increases.
So the benefit essentially is that, and truthfully, I'm one of those people who tends to leave government as close to the people as possible, right? The tax lid doesn't do that. Essentially, it pulls back from local government the ability to raise taxes when needed, and that's where it's been. The local folks go, this is crazy. This is not helping me at all. Whereas at the state level, as the senator was kind of talking about, is like it's like pushing the gas. If we reduce taxes. And the locals need it, they increase, or vice versa. It plays off of each other, and so benefit is only to the state level. It doesn't actually. It doesn't benefit necessarily. It might benefit the people at the local level, but for those officials and elected officials that are working within a budget, just like we do at the state, they're just trying to make it actually work. And so the benefit. It's kind of like tying their hands. So I certainly understand the consternation with this.
Well, the alleged benefit is that it forces local government to live within its means and that it can't grow faster than the rate of inflation, because property tax, in every poll conducted in Kansas in the last 40, 50 years, is the most hated tax in Kansas. People hate property taxes. Now, that's born out of an arrogance that assumes that people love their state and federal government more than their local government, which I would put my money on local government to win that race 99 times out of 100. The old saying that the government which serves people, which is closest to the people, serves the people best, is absolutely true. That I would assume that if people didn't like their local taxes or were upset with local government, they have a pretty swift means to get a redress for those grievances, and that it's much easier to come here or to the county commission than it is to come to the legislature or the federal government and say, hey, you're spending too much. Let's be clear about what's happened. Government students, since about the 1980s, well before you were born, we had this thing called devolution, where we used block grants to devolve authority from the federal government down to the states and then down to the local governments. And we thought, well, we'll let them make the decisions. We'll get some of this power out of Washington and we'll let them have the decision-making and the authority to do these things. And it was all fine and good, so long as the dollars came with it. But then we entered a period where we started to dry up the funding but leave the responsibility with local governments. And so they were forced to raise taxes in one of the only ways they could, property taxes, in order to pay for all of those bills and make sure that those services could continue to be provided. So what you're seeing here is the long tail of devolution. Give up the power, give up the responsibility, and then dry up the funding, and then wonder why property taxes continue to go up. So the solution, if you're going to right-size property taxes at some point, isn't a tax lid, because all that does is create a perverse incentive. Local government should raise their property taxes to the amount of inflation every single year. Otherwise, they lose, right? Because we go 2 or 3 years down the road and they need something, and now they can't raise it very much because they've been capped. And so what we should do instead is trust local government and trust people, because ultimately this is your government at all of these levels, to come in and say, we're tired of paying these taxes, we want to do something different, or we want a different group of services over here. And what we should do instead is seek to return a little bit of the funding that goes along with the responsibility and ease up the burden on local government.
Okay. Questions? Who has a question? Okay. You have to stand up and tell us who you are.
I'm Ron Kimes. This does not necessarily fall into your categories, but in Franklin County, there has been, with the exception of Ottawa, there has been active shooter training to some degree. Ottawa does not do it because it will traumatize their kids. I want to know what your take would be on that, why Ottawa wouldn't have it. I've been through it. I think it's excellent, so I'd like your take on that.
Well,
My understanding is that it is available to Ottawa students voluntarily if they choose to go through it. That the district has not made it mandatory at this point, but it is available if students or their parents believe it's appropriate and they want to go through it. So that is a decision. I just got done talking about local government. That is a decision for the local school board and the superintendent to make on that issue, and I will defer to them. And if more people believe that it should be mandatory, I trust they'll go to the school board meetings and have those conversations. I'm not interested at the state level in imposing or trying to impose a mandate on that elected board to make a different decision than the one they've made, but I am happy that it's being offered at least on a voluntary basis, because I do think the training itself is beneficial to people who find themselves in that situation, and I would hope that people take advantage of it and avail themselves of it when it's offered.
I would also add to that it is available, and parents or guardians also have the opportunity to take their children to the training. It doesn't have to be a school decision. It can be a parental and guardian decision.
thank you for the question. And actually, just talking about active shooter training is important. Just bringing the subject up because it's one of those things that, without a doubt, it would help anybody with my military background, with law enforcement, and other even from the state level representatives that do active shooter training or that are involved in it, people who are sheriff's deputies and folks like that. It's so very important. And I know Central Heights has gone through it. I know Wellsville has done some stuff. And it's at different levels too. Ultimately, it comes down maybe to the school board saying, yeah, let's move forward with this, or with the administration and the school board coming up with actual times that they can do it, or present that or allow that for their teachers to do. I do know that you can get it for free too. I know that within the churches, there were some representatives that did some active shooter training, I was down in Texas when the active shooter happened within a church down there on that Sunday. And so without a doubt, I think that would be something for everybody to experience and to know, because there's a lot of things that naturally we don't do when it comes to active shooter. And so thank you for bringing the question. It's certainly very important, and if our schools haven't done it, I would suggest to the Board of Education, to the administrators, to make it so, because you can find it for free.
Who has a question? All right, I'm going to let you sit on it. I'm going to ask another question.
I thought it was coffee time.
Tell me, no, it's not. Stop. I want you to describe the issue of transparency under the dome, and how are you working to address this particular issue? Representative Finch.
Thanks for the question. I know there's been some letters to the editor in the Ottawa Herald about this issue, and I have written a column kind of by way of response to talk about it. There are a lot of issues surrounding transparency. The Kansas City Star series of articles that came out covered a lot of different issues in state government, talking about DCF and what happens with children in foster care. We had some high-profile incidents where children lost their lives, and there was an issue with records getting out. We've had issues in the past with people using private email addresses and private email calendars so they can avoid having those things subject to open records disclosure. There are issues within the legislative process that have been talked about. And I want to zero in a little bit on some of the legislative stuff, because that's kind of what has been mentioned lately here locally. And I've had some good conversations with some of the folks in the audience today about transparency. The bills that are pending in the legislature are based on that Kansas City Star article, which said that 90% of the bills in the legislature were anonymous. And that is a misleading statistic at best. What they did is they took every bill that was introduced and had a committee on it, so bill by the Committee on Judiciary, and said that was an anonymous bill. That's not an anonymous bill. In the 6 years I've been there, I've served on the Judiciary Committee. We always include in the minutes who sought the bill's introduction, and if it's a representative, on whose behalf did they ask for the introduction. So that is in the minutes. Those minutes are published. They're on the website. Anybody can see that. That is transparency. You know who introduced that bill. What the STAR did is they just took a look at the 104 bills that passed last year's legislative session and said, well, if we don't have a name on the physical bill, then it must be something that they're hiding from us, and it's an anonymous bill. And quite frankly, that is not, it's not accurate. It's just not true. You can go through the 104 bills and you can look at the supplemental notes and you can look at the bills themselves, and the vast majority of those bills have names attached to them, whether individuals or organizations who sought their introduction. They also talked a little bit about a process called gut and go. Gut and go is the process by which all of the contents of a bill are removed and something else is put in it. And it's a process that every legislature uses across the country. It's a process that the federal legislature, Congress, uses as it does things, and it is a tool. It is like any other tool. It's like a hammer. A hammer can be used to build something beautiful. A hammer can be used to break out a window or scratch someone's car. It's all about the intent with which the tool is used. And I'll tell you that last year we would not have had the tax bill, we would not have had the budget, we would not have had the human trafficking bill that passed, we would not have had the Public Benefits Corporation bill that passed without doing a total amendment, essentially a gut and go on bills. There are a lot of positive developments that occur because there are places throughout the process. And remember, we talked about Schoolhouse Rock, how a bill becomes a law. There are several places where legislation can die. And if it's a good idea, you may need to resurrect it. The old joke that if you die, you want to lay in state in Topeka because nothing ever truly dies in the State House. Well, there are times when you want to resurrect an idea. There are times you wish an idea would go away. Trust me, there's quite a few of those too. But you need to have a mechanism to get some of those policies through. And when we're sitting there on day 115 and it's costing the taxpayers, whatever, is it $80,000 a day or whatever the newspaper starts to run, if we didn't have a gut and go process, it would take 3 days every time we wanted to do a tax bill, every time we wanted to do a budget bill, if we didn't gut something else and stick that tax bill or budget bill inside of it. So keep that in mind. That's the trade-off if you want to do away with that process completely. And then I think the third thing was committee votes and whether committee votes are recorded. We don't have the means in my committee to record all of those votes. There are 23 people on the Judiciary Committee. That's essentially 1/5 of the Kansas House. And we don't have electronic voting boards like we do so we'd have to go around each time we had a vote and have everyone say that. What we do instead is we live stream audio of our committee, and it is archived. Anybody can go back and listen, and I offer all of my committee members the opportunity to have their votes recorded if they want to. Now, where can we get better? How do we get better? One of the things we've done this year is every bill has their sponsor on the website. That's how most people access the information anyway. They go online and they look at the website. Every bill this year, if you look on the right side, and our website needs some work, but at least now it shows who sponsored the bill. And I'm working with the Speaker's office on some ways that we can enhance if a bill goes through a gut and go procedure. So the website shows what was in it, what was added to it, and any related bills. So if it was the content of another bill, you will know immediately, and the title will change, but it will have both the old title and the new title, so you can know for certain this was a bill about this, it's now a bill about this, and you can go back and see the old bill and see who sponsored that, so you have complete transparency about what has happened in the process. I think sometimes people believe that transparency means I don't have to look for the information. You still have to look for the information. We've got some government kids here. You can't just Google everything, right? Sometimes you have to go to a more authoritative source, or you have to do some research and dig in. It should not be very difficult, but I think we've got it down now to where it's 1 or 2 clicks and you can have access to all of that information.
You know, it's interesting. We are more transparent than we've ever been before. We do have a ways to go, but if you think about this, 10, 12 years ago, we didn't have the websites. We didn't have access to that information in the manner that we do. In fact, one of the big things that I think we're getting better at is you used to have legislators that would vote one way, and it was very difficult for constituents to track it. You know where I'm going with this. They would go home and not tell their constituents where they had voted. I love the fact that you can look it up, or my legislative update, our legislative updates tell you how we voted. I mean, we're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to be completely transparent, and it should be. The committee process, our committee minutes have always contained who made the motion. I know one of our colleagues put out an update last week, though, that said that anybody should be able to come in and put in a bill, anyone, that it shouldn't just be legislators. Well, if you think about that, there's a cost attributed to putting in a bill. And so if anybody just puts it in and you don't have a legislator that's going to try and mentor it through the process or step with it through the process, then what's the use in putting the bill and what's the expense to the state taxpayers? So there does need to be some checks and balances in it. Also, not only do we have live audio streaming with the committees now, we have live video and audio. We've always had audio with the chamber since I've been up there, but now we have video also. So we can, and they are archived online. They're fairly easy to find. And I think that's the biggest thing with the transparency issue is the website. It is not the most user-friendly website available. So it does make it a little bit, you have to dig to track the bills to any degree, but it is possible, it is feasible. In fact, I wish more of our colleagues would pay more attention to tracking some of the bills and what path they've taken. But it is more transparent than it's ever been. We just need to continue working in that direction.
And we have a question after I talk real quick, but and I agree with our other representatives. I believe we're more transparent than we've ever been. I guess there was an article, and there's been a real focus. It's a talking point about transparency. Transparency is super important, and I don't think anybody's trying to hide anything. I think that would be really, really wrong when it comes anybody up here. There could be people out there, but I want to use an example that happened this past week for myself with House Bill 2643. House Bill 2643 is one that came back to Higher Education Budget Committee. Typically, the Higher Education Budget Committee, we just work the higher education budgets. That's what we do. We give recommendations and we bring that back to the Appropriations Committee. Well, I put a bill forward, House Bill 2643, that had to do with in-state and out-of-state tuition for illegals, and then it helped help foster kids, stuff like that. So I put a bill in, came to my committee, and I thought it would go back to Fed and State. So I'm going back and forth talking with the Speaker and all this stuff, try and get it to go to Fed and State where I thought it should go through. Bigger committee, be able to work it. Well, it came back to my committee, and I was like, all right, well, we'll work it then. And that's about as it came back instead of maybe they were trying to kill it, maybe they weren't, whatever. But if you have the guts to work the bill or hear the bill. So I brought it forward and to be heard with our committee. Oh man, whenever you hear a Fed and State bill, yeah, a lot comes forward. So through this whole process, we had controversial testimony on both sides, and I wanted to give it time. Enough time, so I actually made it for a second day. That was real controversial. People got upset and said, you're trying to kill this and everything. I was just trying to be transparent and let people know, no, we want to have a good hearing, give both sides fair hearing and all of that. Well, needless to say, it didn't go well for the hearing or for the bill. And so the process is working. The bill was basically dead on arrival. I could tell that with my committee, but I was sold on actually hearing it out, so we heard it out. That said, then as a committee chair, I can either work the bill or not work the bill. If I work the bill, and this goes back to Representative Finch, they can gut and go the bill if the majority of the committee is on one side or the other. And in this case, they didn't like the bill. The majority of my committee did not like the bill. They told me that. And in fact, one of the members on the other side says, I'm going to gut and go this bill. Now, you can call it abuse or not, but in this case, if they gut and go this bill, they could put anything into that bill and then pass it out, and I've lost basically control. Now, I can shut the thing down. I can do anything. I can shut the committee down. I can do a lot of different stuff. We could try and table, things like that. But the gut and go is part of the process. There is abuses, without a doubt. It sounds really evil when you say gut and go, but it is one of those things, like Representative Finch said, that if we didn't have it in the end, it would take an exponential amount of time when it comes to getting the work done. It's something that, if abused, it's a bad thing, but the intention of it was never necessarily a bad thing. It was actually to be used to make the process so we can get done quicker.
I wanted to point out that every legislature in the country has some process like the gut and go, basically a complete amendment of the bill. Probably my favorite is South Dakota. They call it hog shedding. So if gut and go isn't your term of art, then South Dakota has hog shedding for what they do to a bill when they completely amend it and put something else in.
Thanks for that input. That's a question.
I'm Heather Morgan. I'm going to give it to you.
We can hear it.
Sarah wants me to use the mic, so I will oblige her. I'm Heather Morgan. I wanted to say that the legislative transparency issues that you guys, the improvements in the last 2 years are huge. But could we work on 346 South? The old Supreme Court room is not archived. You can only watch it live. And so House Tax is in the old Supreme Court room, Senate, one of the Senate, I think Senate, Fed and State. So if we could work on getting that archived instead of just live stream, that would be awesome.
Of course, that's a question, right? Because, yes.
Isn't that
Could we work on that?
I'll check.
I think is what she meant to say, yes.
Have you checked recently?
Have you checked YouTube?
Like yesterday.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll work on that. I know
Yeah.
112 North, where Judiciary meets, is archived, and that's why we did the interim school, the K-12 stuff in that room, so it could be archived. And I think the intention is to eventually get every committee room to be both streamed and archived, and they're working on that.
Yeah, and that's too bad because we had a joint tax committee meeting this week that was House and Senate that explained what the federal tax changes, the impact that it could have on Kansas revenue, tax revenue.
And with that, prior to the hearing yesterday on the school funding study, they actually mentioned that. We made a motion in K-12 budget to make sure that it's being archived, but then they actually mentioned that beforehand, and LAS, they said, yes, this will be archived. But it was our assumption that it was being archived, but so yesterday, at least yesterday, was archived, or will be archived, so.
Yeah, we can definitely work on that.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Other questions? Okay. You gotta stand up and tell us who you are.
Judy Davis Cole. First of all, thank you, House, for passing the telemedicine bill. I'm very excited about that. And now going forward with Medicaid expansion and what happened with it this last week, where do you think we are on Medicaid expansion?
Representative Jones.
From the House side, and my understanding, in the telemedicine, what an important and powerful thing, especially for out in western Kansas, where it provides telemedicine. So I know when I was in the military, one of the things that allowed me to be able to do what I did on the battlefield, where if I was out in the middle of nowhere, I could do appendectomies, I could do different things that needed to be done, but it would be via telemedicine essentially. And so to be able to do that kind of thing and do it well, it just provides access exponentially. So very important. On the Medicaid expansion, my understanding, we haven't actually heard. There was something that was supposed to come forward, didn't come forward, and I don't know that it's tricks, but it's part of the rules and process. And so I assume we will hear Medicaid expansion. And was it heard this year again?
In the Senate.
In the Senate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I know right now on that.
I can give you other House perspective, and then we can hear from the Senate on this. My understanding is it will not originate or the House will not take the first stab at it this year if expansion comes up. It will be in the Senate, and I know it's over in the Senate below the line, I think, in terms of debate over there. I do want to talk about the telemedicine bill for just a minute, because I don't know if everyone fully understands how important that is in a state where we have such an urban and rural divide as it is here in Kansas. But the ability for people who live in their, maybe out of an urban area, or even those who are elderly who have trouble getting out and going to the doctor, the ability to basically FaceTime or Skype with your physician or physician's assistant to have them assess you, and there are a lot of different tools now for making those medical assessments telemedically, is a phenomenal improvement in care in Kansas. And the bill, why do we need the bill, right? We all FaceTime and Skype, and I know you kids Snapchat, send pictures of yourselves making faces all day long. And I don't know that there's a medical diagnosis that can be made by that, but what the bill says is telemedicine is now a healthcare service in Kansas that has to be covered by insurance companies and has to be covered by Medicaid and Medicare for those who have those plans as well. So now it is a requirement that payment be made to providers who provide services telemedically. And as you know, you always want to follow the money. And now that it has to be paid for, it can be used more frequently. And I think it will be a huge improvement for those who are homebound and can't get out, as well as for those who may live miles, sometimes hundreds of miles away from a physician or nurse practitioner who can now make that assessment. So this is a huge leap forward for medicine in Kansas. On the issue of Medicaid expansion, we had an amendment offered this week on the telemedicine bill of all places about Medicaid expansion. It was ruled not germane, meaning it could not go on the bill. Interestingly enough, that amendment, I'm not sure what version you have in the Senate, is the same one that failed last year. And it is the full expansion with absolutely no means to try to control the budgetary growth. We saw in Oregon this year that they've just gone back to the voters with a brand new tax because Medicaid expansion has exceeded all of the budget estimates there. We've seen Arkansas go through the same process. With only a couple notable exceptions, no state has expanded Medicaid and had it meet budget targets. In other words, it has always exceeded. It has cost more, and in most cases vastly more, than what it was estimated to cost in the beginning. And the states who have not had as big a problem with their budgets are those who put in some caps to try to keep those costs down. And it's interesting to me that if they're trying to entice votes from people who were no's before to become yeses, they've made zero changes in the policy behind the bill to try to get those votes, which makes it seem to me that it's more about a political statement or an interest group's agenda than it is about really passing policy and getting the votes they need.
Well, the telemedicine, we have not seen that in the Senate yet, but it touches on a couple of issues that are important to the state of Kansas. One of them is broadband. It's when we talk about infrastructure, and you've heard me say this, we talk about roads, bridges, rail, other infrastructure. We have to include broadband, and the federal government has taken some steps in order to help that with rural Kansas, rural America, and we need to continue that effort. It's critical. Broadband has to be part of our infrastructure so that we can allow services like telemedicine and other services. We can allow jobs, have jobs, people telecommute from their homes. If we have the infrastructure with broadband, it is a boon to the economy and can help our rural quality of life. The Medicaid expansion did pass the Senate Health Committee. I'm not sure all the committee members were there that day. There's a little bit of controversy over that, but it did pass out of committee. It is below the line, and so it is in leadership's hands at this point. What's interesting, and we've heard, I'll just bring this up, Senator Moran has done a great job in trying to provide access to our veterans to local hospitals that are a certain distance away from veteran facilities. If we would take that a step further and just make it an insurance card for our veterans so that they could use their local hospitals, their local pharmacies, that would be a win for the veterans. It would be a win for the local communities. It would support the hospitals and the pharmacies. It would be a win for an improvement on the medical system. Everybody wins. The community wins, the veterans win, and taxpayers win because it's better services. So I hope that we can continue that effort and encourage our federal delegation to support Senator Moran's efforts in supporting our veterans and supporting our local hospitals.
I think we've got a question.
I'll stay seated if you don't mind.
That's all right.
Almeida Edwards. I don't know if this is going to be comic relief or what, but just as I ask questions at the livestock meeting but don't have a cow, I'm asking about parimutuel and don't have a horse or a greyhound. But the first thing I woke up to this morning on the farm news from WIBW was a couple of friends of mine, Ernie Rodino and also George Wingert, talking about what's going on with parimutuel. And of course, we already have tracks, it's legal, but what's happening in Topeka on parimutuel, and isn't that a source of revenue?
It's probably a joke in there somewhere about somebody's ox getting gored as well, but I won't try to make it. So here's the issue in Kansas. Kansas has a weird hybrid. Kansas has technically all of the slot machines and all of the casinos in Kansas are owned by the state of Kansas. They're owned by the lottery. And a certain percentage of that revenue is retained by operators who applied for and were granted licenses to build casinos in various parts of the state. There is also currently in the law the ability for the racetracks, and there were 3 of them, the Woodlands, there's one outside of Wichita, and Camptown down by Frontenac, Pittsburgh, also have the authority right now to have slot machines, but they only get to keep about 22% of the revenue off of that, while the casino operators get to keep about 40% of the revenue off of their slot machines. Okay, so this was all part of the act that was passed back in, I believe, '96 that brought the first casinos to the state. So the issue is that the horse track folks, of which our friend George Wingert, he works for one of the owners, a guy named Phil Ruffin out of Vegas. They want to have slot machines at the same rate at the racetracks as the casinos do. And this is probably for example purposes. Let's talk about KCK up there by the Legends, right? You have the Hollywood Casino, and kind of just right down the road there you have what used to be the Woodlands. And the question is, why does this one only get 22% of the revenue and this one gets 40% of the revenue? The folks who raise horses for racing and the folks who raise greyhounds for racing really want this because it would bring back in their minds the tracks. People would be coming, they would be running more races, they would be able to utilize the horses and dogs in terms of the more frequently with racing at those venues. They're called racinos, by the way, so we always get fun terms out of Topeka. So you have a casino, and then if you have the dog or racetrack, you got a racino. So the racino guys and gals, they want some more money on their return. The bill is in Fed and State Affairs Committee, which means it's a blessed bill, means it could come out at any time. It's not subject to the other deadlines like we've talked about with turnaround. I expect that sometime after turnaround it will get a hearing and come out. Now here's the other part of the issue. All those casino people, right? They said, we're going to put billions of dollars into the state and we're going to build the casinos so that people will come here, and in return we basically get a monopoly on this. You're not going to change this for a period of about 30 years. There are penalties if you change it in the contract before the 30 years is up. And so they're saying if you allow the racinos to have a higher percentage off their slot machines, you've breached our contract and you owe us money. And that money could be somewhere between $125 million and $325 million, depending on who you ask and whose lawyers are running the calculators. So that's the issue we have to deal with. Do you breach, quote unquote, these contracts in order to give the racinos a higher rate and then risk the ire and the lawsuit that will come to you from the casino operators? And that's what's being kind of worked out in committee, and there's a proposal to have the racino guys indemnify the state and agree to pay any of those damages that would go to the casino operators if we change the formula. So it's kind of complicated, but that's kind of the 30,000-foot view of it.
Yeah. And Ernie and George are great friends, so we appreciate them. And you know, I haven't seen the bill in the Senate. It's not in Fed. I'm on Fed and State. We haven't had a hearing on it, so I think they're going to try running it through the House first. They had it in the Senate a couple years ago. They had a path. The senator that was lead on it, I don't know what happened in that situation, but they did not get it out of the Senate.
Representative Jones?
I can speak just a second to it. Really, this is a tough one because it's state versus state. It's ag versus gambling expansion, basically. And so I know down south, well, just all around, if the reason that this has become an issue essentially is because they've tried to stop. It was done in such a way you raise the amount or lower the amount that you can pull from the slot machines. It makes it to where it doesn't make money, and it shuts down the gambling in that area essentially. And that's kind of what happened down in Wichita. And so it affects the racetracks and the dogs, and now it's an ag versus gambling thing. And so, and the state versus state thing. And so we, as legislators, we have to weigh it. They came before PROPS last year, and now I guess Fed and state, and it weirdly died in a PROPS. I'm not really sure why, but like it was like planned to die. So I don't know why it happened the way it did in a PROPS. But my biggest concern is that you can build a casino or racetrack or whatever and do it right along the edges and of Kansas, and all of our Kansas folks are just going to go there to gamble and stuff. So we already have gambling, we already have that stuff. The question is expansion. Do we actually help those that have the race horses, the dogs that would move out? Or go to other states for that? Would it actually help or hinder? And so, yeah, it'll all be argued again, and the questions will come up again. But that's basically what it comes down to: is expansion of gambling versus ag.
One other complicating factor is there's now a pending Supreme Court case in the United States Supreme Court out of New Jersey about they want the right to have a sports book to basically be able to bet on sporting events like they do in Vegas. If that case is decided a certain way, it will open up the possibility for sports betting across the United States too, and look for that to be an issue here in the pari-mutuel debate. Do the casinos get the sports books? Do the racinos get the sports book, but with a lower rate on slot machines? And so there'll be a whole other wild card, as you would expect in a gambling discussion. The joker will be played here at some point when the Supreme Court makes that decision, and that will complicate things.
And if I could add to that, there's already been lobbyists hired for Kansas in that issue.
Yes, by the sports leagues, the NBA and MLB have already got a lobbyist on the ground.
They're already at the Capitol. Yep.
I always appreciate the time, and I know everyone here appreciates the time that you give to come and answer the questions from the constituents. And I've told our friend Roxy Merton-Mettenberg that she can have the last question, and it is 11 o'clock, so I hope that you'll give me just a couple more minutes to let her ask her question.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. My question is about House Resolution or Senate Resolution 1611 and House Resolution 5005, both of which call for the states to call a convention of the states, constitutional convention, whatever you wish to call it. I have concerns about, if you favor this bill, what is it you wish to, or this resolution, what is it you wish to change about the U.S. Constitution precisely? What do you want to take out? What do you want to add? What is objectionable about our Constitution? I should add that I feel a lot of concern about this because I know for a number of years groups like the Koch brothers have promoted this. So if you favor it, I would like to know why.
Thank you. Representative Jones?
I can speak to it. That's over on the Senate side right now. I don't know if they passed it out or not. They did pass it out. But yeah, Convention of the States, man, what a loaded question to talk about. I've got some information, some folks down south that have been talking to me constitutionally against the Convention of the States. And John Birch Society folks who are real heavy on not doing a Convention of the States, Article 5 Convention of the States. And that's a struggle for me when I look at the Constitution and see the Article 5 Convention of the States, and that it was put there by our founding fathers for a purpose. To get to your question, the one thing that I would really want to change right now, if I could do it, would be, and at least have the discussion, is a balanced budget amendment. I realize that we can print money and all that, but I do not, and I was talking to some experts just the other day, that given our spending at the federal level and entitlements, he said it's like a fire burning right next to you, and the smoke's being blown the other way, and you just don't realize that it's burning. And we have to be honest as a nation and say that this is happening right now, and that 10 years down the road, everybody's going to very well be on fire. And so we want to make sure that we're dealing with the big four essentially, when it comes to spending. And so a balanced budget amendment would be a move in that direction. And just to clarify, whether it's Koch brothers or Source, there's both sides have been asking for that because there's things that they can get rid of or that they feel like they can fix on both sides.
Senator Tyson?
Oh, sure. Do you want to go?
You want to go ahead?
Okay. I am fairly close to this issue. I was not one of the sponsors of the Convention of the State resolution. For those of you that don't know, Article 5, there's two ways to amend our U.S. Constitution. One is the amendment originates with the U.S. Congress. The second is that the amendment originates with the states. But both of those, wherever the amendment originates, either one of those processes has to be ratified by 3/4 of states. So 38 states would have to vote in favor of the amendment. It's not a simple process, and 34 states, if I remember correctly, have to call the convention. What's gone on over the past years, and Kansas has had resolutions in the past for a convention to amend. It's not a constitutional convention. I know that term's bantered around a lot, but it's a convention to amend. And Kansas has had several resolutions passed. In fact, the Fed and State Committee has requested a history of those so that we know where we're at. And other states have too. What's gone on is there is no one that we're aware of at the federal level that is capturing or counting these resolutions that are passed within the states. So there is a federal bill that would require them to be counted and for a specific entity to be responsible for taking care of that. That's one activity that's going on. While there's activity in other groups that are trying to pass resolutions within the state. The Convention of States has been active. I don't know how many states they've passed in. I think 3 or 4 at this time, maybe a couple more. But their effort is to try and get a call through their language, and they're calling it on 3 different topics. One of the topics that I would support the states meeting to possibly amend our U.S. Constitution would be a balanced budget. The other one that we could look at as a nation is term limits. We hear that talked about a lot too. I think that's one that we could actually get consensus on both sides, because if we do pass a balanced budget amendment, we're not going to be able to balance that overnight. So we have to tread lightly as to how we go forward balancing the budget. But I do think we need those checks and balances in place. The logistics of a convention are interesting. I've been working with a group for several years. It's a national group. It's a bipartisan group to create rules that if a convention was ever called, that it could be a baseline for those rules. It's not required. There's no law that says you have to use those rules. But it took us as a group 4 years to write those rules and to come to agreement with bipartisan effort. So the logistics also, I've worked on legislation, and now I think the conversations come that most people are aware of it. How do we elect our delegates as the state of Kansas? Who do we send to the convention? I mean, these are questions that we have to ask ourselves and decide in case, I think we should be proactive and decide these in case a convention is ever called. So those are things that the legislature has looked at. It's never passed either chamber or out of committee. The resolution did pass out of committee for the first time in Kansas. It may have passed out of the House last time, I'm not sure, but it did pass out of the Senate Fed and State Committee this year. So it'll be interesting to see whether the majority leader brings it above the line or not. But that's where we're at. It's not an issue to be taken lightly. It is our U.S. Constitution. I'm proud of our Constitution. But there is an avenue for the states to say, enough. our federal government is out of control, and let's put the brakes on some of the activity that they're doing.
Well, I think both of the previous speakers have discussed what the Convention of the States is about. Article 5 allows for two-thirds of the states to call a constitutional convention. It doesn't limit that call. If a call is made, it's to consider amendments to the Constitution, and those I would presume would come from red states and blue states, and you'd see a whole lot of different ideas. I think some of the reservations go back to when we had our first convention, and you'll recall that got everybody together to talk about the Articles of Confederation, and hey, we should maybe make some amendments to those because there's problems, and they ended up drafting a whole new document, which is the Constitution we have now. And I think that once bitten, twice shy, Americans have always been a little bit reluctant about, do we have a convention again on the Constitution, and maybe they suggest throwing the whole thing out. But we do have to remember that Article 5 also has a procedural safeguard. No amendment proposed at a convention can become law unless 3/4 of the states ratify that. And so that's either by state legislatures or by conventions called in the various states. So 38 of them have to ratify it. And those of you who have been around a while remember the Equal Rights Amendment. We've had several others that didn't quite get there. There are a lot of ink has been written by people writing law review articles about an Article 5 convention. And as the senator said, nobody's even keeping track of these. And there's a real debate about whether you could even have an Article 5 convention if you wanted to, because nobody's counting up to see if we've had 2/3 of the states call for a convention yet. And the Constitution, you'll remember the framers they're really good at using a lot of beautiful language, but a lot of it's very vague. This is one of those very vague times. They don't give us rules for how the convention would operate. There's no limit on the number or types of amendments that could be talked about. But if you're asking me what amendments I would like to see, I would like to see us look at campaign finance, specifically in the wake of the Citizens United decision. I've been the victim of a dark money campaign. It tried to unseat me from public office. I've seen it used, and I can tell you that we need reform in that area. So many times when I have conversations with constituents, they've gotten something in the mail or they've gotten something off a website from an interest group that has a position that's probably beyond the mainstream where most of us live and think and work. And I would just say this to everyone here and everyone listening. We have to be savvy consumers of information. And we do have to think about the biases that are implicit when an interest group, no matter how benign it may seem, send us information. Believe it or not, they have an agenda, usually to get in your pocketbook and get you to send them a check. And so they're going to scare you. They're going to tell you how dire things are and how necessary it is that you act today to defend this or that right or this or that thing that's threatening to be taken away from you by somebody in the legislature or in Congress. So I would ask you to be savvy consumers of that information. I would hope if we have a convention of the states, we could address that, because I don't like people being able to do that without any accountability or saying who they are or where those postcards come from. And I think that we see it with Facebook and Google and some of the issues that are going on now about interference in American elections, about we're only listening to one side of the story. We're bunkering ourselves down with people who think like we do and talk like we do, and we're refusing to have honest and open discussions with people of different opinions. And we don't even agree anymore on what the facts are. And that's a dangerous place for a democracy to be. And so I would support some type of amendment to look at limiting dark money in campaigns so that we can limit the flow of that false information into campaigns, and hopefully let people get back to saying, here's some baseline facts that we can agree on. We may disagree on the implications of those facts, but let's at least have a conversation around them. And I think all of you being here this morning is a good start down that road, and I thank you for taking the time to come here and engage. I know all of us answer phone calls and emails, and if you get one of those scary postcards or you get something on the web or you see a TV story, feel free to call. Let's talk about it. We may not agree at the end of that conversation, but let's have it and see if we can work together to make our state a better place. Thank you all.
Representative Jones, Representative Finch, Senator Tyson, thank you for your time today. We always appreciate this conversation that we can have with you. We will be continuing this conversation on March 17th, which happens to be St. Patrick's Day, here in this exact room. We invite individuals to join us. If there's interest in going to China, because Kansas isn't interesting enough, the Ottawa Area Chamber of Commerce will be having a trip orientation meeting on March 1st right here at City Hall. So we look forward to seeing you back on the 17th, and